Good afternoon, everyone. Happy New Year, and welcome to today's Earshot Professional Development Webinar. My name is Laurab K. Raphael. I'm the Director of Composer Advancement with the American Composers Orchestra. And today's session, titled Tricks of the Trade, offers a peek into something that is perhaps very relevant for many composers, obviously, and music makers operating in the acoustic sound landscape and maybe even beyond. And that is orchestration. And we get to hear some useful tips and guidance from a, dare I say, expert in the field. And I think that's putting it lightly. I'll introduce our guests momentarily, but today's session is part of our Earshot initiatives. As you know, Earshot is the nation's first systemic program for building relationships between orchestras and composers through Earshot readings, collaboratory residencies, consortium commissions, publishing, and professional development sessions like this one. Earshot expands the definition of American orchestral music so that a vibrant and inclusive field is what we have to look forward to in the future. Earshot is operated in partnership with the League of American Orchestras, New Music USA, and the American Composers Forum. And lead support is provided by the From Music Foundation. For more information on our professional development series and all of the other Earshot programs, I encourage you to visit americancomposers.org. As we move through today's session, please feel free to offer any questions that you may have using the Q&A function here on Zoom. That'll be the easiest way for me to see them and perhaps pitch them to our guests. And if you'd like to come onto the screen to ask your question at the end of today's presentation, feel free to use the hand raise function on Zoom, and I will bring in as many of you as I can on the screen as time allows. I'll also be offering a survey in the chat at the conclusion of today's presentation. So if you wouldn't mind clicking on that survey when it appears and offering your feedback, it will be very appreciated. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to today's guest speaker, celebrated as an eloquent, poetic voice in contemporary music by the American Record Guide. Melinda Wagner is music is known for its beauty, power, and intelligence. She received the Pulitzer Prize in 1999 for her concerto for flute, strings, and percussion. Her major works include a trombone concerto for Joseph Alessi and the New York Philharmonic, the piano concerto Extremity of Sky for Emanuel Ax and the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and works like Little Moonhead for the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra. Please join me in welcoming Melinda Wagner.
Hi, everyone. So I will not be seeing faces, right, Rob, until later.
That's correct.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us, Mindy.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm happy and grateful, happy about and grateful for my association with ACO, an extremely important organization for anyone who loves music, but particularly for those who love orchestral music and for those who want to compose it. Um, so I was thinking about this, well, for weeks, of course, but one memory that came to me was from many years ago when I lived in Chicago. When I was a student there, I worked at a gallery and an art school during the summer. And I decided, since I got a discount for any courses I wanted to take, I took a watercolor class. And what I learned from that was, first of all, watercolor is very complicated. You don't just sit with a brush and paint. You have to soak the paper, and if the paper is of the very good quality, which is quite expensive, it's very absorbent and can absorb lots of water, and you want to do that. And the second step, after all of that dries, is to lay down a wash of color in the background, because let's say you want to paint a sunny window with flowers in a vase. It's much more difficult to paint on this bright white paper. Um, so my teacher instructed us to cover the whole paper with maybe a pale yellow or something that enhances and supports whatever it is you paint on top of it. So I was thinking this week about how similar that whole process is to the kind of wash that some composers have put sort of in back of their orchestra, in the background of the thematic material that's going on, by placing texture there, orchestral texture. Um, so I thought of a few examples that are really famous examples. One of them is the first one is by Respighi. And those of you who are really interested in writing for orchestra should take a look at Respighi's works because he was an excellent orchestrator and he knows how to make the orchestra sound spectacular. Um, if we look at The Pines of Rome, these are famous, iconic pieces. Um, I would like to look at how he lays down the wash of texture, just very similar to the way a painter might lay down a wash of pale yellow um, with the plan to paint something that's sunny and bright. So let's listen to a little bit of this. Great. Rob, if we could go back to the first page and just stop it there, that would be great. So I hope you can see this. So this is one of the sunniest pieces around. Obviously, we can all hear that. But this is background music. It's not really an accompaniment, in my view. It's more of laying that sunny back wash, so that when the horns come in on the following page, um, you just have this lovely support from almost everyone in the orchestra. So, what how does Respighi get all of this wonderful bright music? Notice he's used the piano, he's used tremolos, he's used trills in the strings, and lots of scales, figures in the flutes, and clarinets. And he's got some metal like glockenspiel and celesta, all going at once. And you don't, what you hear is a lovely bright texture more than anything else. Another thing I'd like to point out here, if you look at the flutes, notice that flute one and two are trading off measure per measure. Of course, flutes have to worry about how much breath they have, and they can't play forever without taking a breath. But also, going from one player to the next creates a depth in the sound because it's actually moving on the stage from one place to another. So that's a wonderful trick that Respighi uses, and it's out of necessity, of course, but there's a really nice benefit to it. If you go a couple of pages in, Rob, okay, so notice when the horns come in that Respighi pulls a lot of those instruments out. He wants to highlight the tune in the horns. And then on the page you're looking at now, he pulls almost everyone out, um, because now the flutes are going to have the melody. And they don't quite have the strength that the horns do. But he wants to make the texture more sparse and transparent there. But the texture is still going. Okay, let's look at his other monumental piece, the Fountains of Rome. I hope we can access this. Yes, okay, very good. We'll get to John Adams later. Fountains of Rome, though, by Respighi. There you go. Perfect. Okay, very good. Um, an entirely different kind of wash of sound, meant to evoke the image of a lovely fountain in Rome and the sort of murmuring of the water, the gentle murmuring of the water. So he has chosen the second violins with their mutes on. Um, Again, I don't view this as so much of an accompaniment as just a kind of very gentle wash that supports the melody when it comes in on the third bar there. And notice the harmonic, the very high note at the top, which just kind of creates a huge register in all of this because that is a very high note and it's very delicate. So you have a rather celestial kind of sound with that lovely pitch just hanging there. Also noticed in both pieces how Respighi changes the texture anytime a new voice is coming in. So if you go a couple of pages in, or maybe page two, note how he changes things up in that fourth bar when the clarinet now has the solo melody. So you just have tremolos in the second violins, and the cellos come in again with mutes on. So everything is very gentle and delicate, so that we can hear the melody, but it's supported by this lovely texture. Great. So what's next on my list, Rob? Is it the Bartok, or I've forgotten what order? Okay.
I've got whatever you'd like here. We've got Adams and Bartok and Host.
Okay. Um, let's look at the Bartok. Get a little bit
Always a fun.
of a contrast here. Ah, there he is. All right. So I guess you guys are catching on. The piece begins with just the quiet murmur of strings, and that goes for quite a while as the piano makes its entrance. Again, not an accompaniment really, but a texture that supports the piano while staying out of the way. Um, I love this piece. This is the third concerto for piano and orchestra. And to just sort of switch gears here, maybe we could listen to the Holst. This is the planets. Holst is another great orchestrator for those of you who are interested in looking at scores. Great. I love this piece. It's got such a great sense of foreboding, and it's been so imitated, particularly in the Star Wars film scores. But if we look at the first page, thanks, Laura. Okay. Yes, we have this strings playing sort of this militaristic marching kind of quality, although it's in an odd meter. Um, but I think what's really making this foreboding and kind of scary is the gong, and it's subtle. You might not be able to hear it through this means, through Zoom, but it just provides this low and metallic um, wash of sound that is maybe more sense than heard. And I think that makes this really scary, this music, much more than the col legno strings. And col legno, by the way, means that the string players are playing a little bit with the wood of their bow. So that's where the percussive sound comes from. Notice also that he has two harps and that they're not playing the same thing. They're playing sort of the mirror image of each other. So the sound is all fleshed out. And you get a steady drone of sound there that has texture to it because it's moving. This is a great example of using texture to support the music that's more thematic and meant to be in the foreground. Thanks. And a really, really great, brilliant piece, really fun piece is Slonimsky's Earbox by John Adams. And he pulls out all the stops right in the very beginning, as you'll hear. Okay, great. Um, going back to the first page, wow, there's a lot going on here. But I think one thing that's really important to notice are the keyboards, because they go for a good, I mean, I think most of this stretch of music with this, what is basically a tremolo. I mean, they're just going back and forth with their left and right hands, and that's going all the way through. And then the winds are doing basically the same kind of thing, just this repeated figure. And then, then all of these other action is almost overpowered, but not quite. Um, and even when the music starts to fade, he keeps the trills going in the strings and the winds to keep the texture behind in the background going, providing this support when the orchestra just thins out a little bit and you can still hear it. So there's this underlying sound that goes throughout. In fact, through most of this piece. And this is a really fun piece to look at for all kinds of orchestration tips and hints. So I think that's it for my examples. And I'm wondering if anybody has questions. Or Rob, if you have a question.
I do have a question.
Sure.
I think it's so fascinating to look at scores and really, sonically take in where there's absence. And I think sometimes in a lot of compositions, we see sort of this abundance of string writing. But can you talk to us a little bit about maybe the effectiveness of less strings in an orchestral piece?
Less strings. Okay. One thing that I talk with my students about, and there is a temptation for all of us to write for strings from start to finish, to have them playing the whole time. Um, it almost feels like we should be doing that. I don't know why, but one thing we talk about is the fact that the strings are all in the front of the stage. So, I mean, this is a practical issue. There's a lot of power in taking them out for a few bars because what we hear is the music that's coming from a different space and on the stage. And when the strings are always kind of sawing away, always active in live performance, that can actually tip the saturation um, of our ears, I mean, and our eyes. So we're visually, it's hard to look at them working the whole time, and they also can overpower what's happening in the rest of the orchestra if they're always playing. So taking things out once in a while allows us to hear the other colors of the orchestra. So when you're writing for orchestra, pay attention to how often the strings are playing or how um, are they playing for long stretches. Sometimes it's good to take them out.
Thank you. Another question I had was you talked about using these examples that you gave us, as a means to studying. How do you incorporate score study into your compositional or orchestration process?
Well, I always say to my students again, steal from the best. So if you see a combination when you're looking at a score, if you have picked up with your ears a sound that you love and you go to investigate, how did the composer do that? Um, it's probably a good idea if you love that sound and you want to use it to somehow find a way to make it your own. So composers, that's how they learn how to orchestrate. It's much more effective than actually taking an orchestration class and learning the ranges of the instruments. If you go to the scores and see what the great orchestrators did and how they combined instruments to make unique sounds, that is a really great way to learn how to be a colorful and vibrant orchestrator. So the composers that I've shared with you today are great orchestrators. I would say go to Ravel. I would say that every single day. Go to Ravel. Almost anything that he's written for orchestra is fantastic. But in particular, um, it's really instructive to go back and listen to Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition for piano and really get that into your bloodstream, and then go and look at Ravel's orchestration of that piece. There is just a wealth of information in there for anyone wanting to be a good orchestrator. And he comes up with some great solutions for how to turn piano music into orchestral music. So that would be one thing I've looked at and would advise other composers to look at both pieces.
We're starting to get some questions. I do encourage you all who are watching and attending this webinar, please put your questions in the Q&A section of the webinar. We're happy to answer them. Mindy, I have maybe just sharing an example of me witnessing you in in your field. I will never forget, I think we were at Indiana University. You were a mentor composer. And one of the composers was working something out with the percussionist, and you mentioned a Super Ball. And I remember just being in the background being like, what in the world is a Super Ball? And of course, you there was this really cool moment where you and the percussionist were kind of talking about the effectiveness of something like that. And it kind of speaks to what you're saying, when you find these things that sound cool or that are interesting to you, go ahead and pluck it out. That sort of leads me to this question that I have about how do you learn instrument ranges and timbres um, well beyond what's written in textbooks?
Well, again, you have to go to the scores and also listen to recordings. I mean, that's sort of the basic activity that is required. But when it comes to things like Super Ball mallets or water gongs, I was talking with a student the other day about a water gong, and we can talk about that if anyone is curious. But a lot of that has to do with just sort of experimenting in your home. So I wonder, how did the Super Ball mallet come into being? I think somebody had a Super Ball and just was curious and thought, well, what if I rub this across a snare drum, or I rub it across a timpani or a gong? What'll happen? Knowing that a Super Ball is not only really bouncy, but it's also got a lot of friction because it's made of rubber. So cool, that is a great sound. How can I put this on a stick and use it in the next piece? So I think that was probably a result of a lot of experimentation. And I will tell you that because I studied with him so many years ago, George Crumb came up with a lot of his really great sounds by experimenting in his basement and playing with the piano insides of the piano that he had down there. And so some of it is this experimentation, going to concerts and watching as well as listening. If you can sit in rehearsals of an orchestral rehearsal, try, if you can, to sit in the back of the orchestra. Sometimes orchestras will let students in particular sit in back so they can watch percussionists, for instance. They're always in the back, so they're hard to see from the audience. So, but it's really, really, really helpful and hugely instructive to see the choreography that they have to have in order to get from one instrument to the next, putting the mallets down to pick up other mallets. There's a lot of equipment and many, many moving parts. And we don't get to really see that unless we're sitting right next to them. So, any chance you guys get to be a little bit closer to them is, I mean, that's how I learned. And I would suggest, really making a case for sitting on the stage.
Thank you, Mindy.
Sure.
We got some questions, so
Great.
pardon if I mispronounce these names. I'm going to do my best. Josiah says thank you, and also says, like in Host's Mars movement, The gong plays a crucial role in filling out, but not overpowering. Are there other ways of utilizing percussion instruments to not just punctuate rhythm, but fill out any necessary support for other instruments?
Sure. Well, the quick answer is the timpani, which of course has been used for hundreds of years. Um, it's a wonderful instrument. A very quiet roll can provide sort of a subtle underpinning of music and also harmonic underpinning. And of course, the timpani can get really, really loud too. But that is something that very similar to the gong part in that piece um, can provide sort of a textural background. But it's also pitch. So uh, one is going to hear that. And unlike a bass drum, for instance, which can also provide a really fantastic lower end texture to the orchestra, but it's not pitched. It's just a very, very low, low um, kind of a rush of sound.
Thank
Tim,
you.
yes, suspended cymbals can go a long, long time in sort of a pedal tone. There's a lot of partials that you hear when we have a suspended cymbal roll. And of course, if there's a crescendo with that instrument, it can be extremely effective. And of course, we can hit the cymbal with a stick too, which is also really loud, very splashy. But one can play that subtly and have again, a texture that is sometimes more sensed than heard. You know.
Thank you. Johnny says, what's a time where you tried something and thought, I don't like how that's orchestrated? How did you resolve that?
Yes, I can think of cringeworthy moments in almost every one of my pieces, but kind of there's a good approach to that, kind of generally, because in all of our music, we're going to hear a moment that didn't go quite as well as we thought. Of course, we always have the option of revising, but that can send you down the rabbit hole. There has to be some point where you put a double bar on the piece and move forward to the next piece. But if you hear a cringeworthy moment that you've decided that you have to let go, really figure out what it is that you don't like about it. Because if you don't define what that is, what makes you uncomfortable, then you won't learn from the mistake. And likewise, if you have moments in a piece that went really, really well, and every time, you have a glow of pride every time you hear that part of the piece, figure out why and figure out what went well, what combination went well, what pitches went well, so that you will know to do that again. So that's how we learn. That's how we evolve as composers. I don't think any piece is going to be absolutely perfect. And one can look at that in a positive way. It keeps us humble and it keeps us learning.
Thank you. Tashego says, how do you approach orchestration as a storytelling tool? How do I, as a composer, shape long-term tension and emotional development? And how would I practice that as a starting composer?
Oh boy. Well, that's a really big question because you're talking about orchestration as well as composition. Um, so, one way to create tension is to create a sense of the slow burn, where you're building perhaps in dynamics, in volume, or you're building in register that is going from usually low to high, creating expectation in the music. So, for instance, if you sing a scale and you stop the scale on the second to the last note, that note has a lot of power and it has a lot of momentum in it. You want the scale to go forward. So, taking that sort of metaphor into your own music, try to create expectation. That can be done through repetition. If you repeat a phrase over and over again, the listener's going to start to feel like, oh, I'm going to hear that again. So, how can you foil that to create yet another set of expectations? Um, Change it up a little bit, and that creates a puff of energy in the music. One thing is one thing is really really true is a long, slow burn over many, many pages is almost impossible because there's only so high an instrument can go. There's a limit to the volume. So one trick is to build, if you can see my hand here, to build to a point of some tension and then pull back and do a restart sort of under it. And then again, so you have these builds that are sort of dovetailed, and that way you retain momentum, but you're also conserving energy. Um, it's really, really hard to have a piece that is tension, that is full of tension from start to finish. So pulling back and kind of starting, I mean, an example would be if you have a crescendo to mezzo forte or forte, pull back and start again at piano and then do it again and maybe a little bit more the second and third times and so on and so on. So overall, you have a very long build to the big moment.
Thank you. Mark says, are there any chamber music writing idioms that don't work as well in orchestral settings?
Well, chamber music is much more transparent, right? We can hear individual instruments, um, particularly if they aren't doubled. We hear each tune. We hear what everyone is doing. Um, Also, it's possible to be contrapuntal in a way that you can't be in an orchestra. For instance, asking for a lot of detail in the strings, where you're asking various parts of the string section to do different things. That can only go so far because and that is more of a chamber music approach to writing music where you have lots of detail. So remember that the string sections are large sections, and their training is to play as an ensemble. So they're not really used to playing soloistically unless they have been asked to play a solo. So they play as a group, and one mistake that composers can make is to write for orchestra the way they would write for chamber ensembles.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Johnny says, are there any orchestration resources which deal with instrumentation as related to room dimensions, such as writing for a concert hall versus small recording studio, and how that changes bass and string balance, for example?
Oh my goodness. That's a tough question because even among recording studios, each room is different. Each set of equipment is different. Each concert hall is different. So you can have one piece sound very, very different. This happened in Philadelphia. I grew up going to the Academy of Music, which was designed to look like a Paris opera house. So it's very tall and the ceiling is very high. And years ago, when the Kimmel Center was built, it was built to be a normal concert hall, not an opera concert hall. So the musicians, and I remember this, had to really adjust because they could hear each other better and they could also hear each other differently. So the balance was different. I mean, it was a huge adjustment, and I'm sure the New York Philharmonic had to go through a similar adjustment when they had their hall renovated recently. So I frankly don't know of any textbook that addresses this, but I'm sure it's out there. it can be frustrating to hear a new piece in a room that's not very forgiving, um, that's very dry and doesn't have any resonance to it. So, but you never know what you're going to get. So that is one of our occupational hazards. But I'll think about it. I think about it and let Rob know if I find a textbook about that.
Yeah. I'm curious how I have to ask this question. You knew it was
Sure.
coming. How has the rise of technology and software impacted the process of orchestrating a work?
Okay. Yes, you had to ask that, right? uh, um, I think it's become pretty sophisticated now. If you have the money to buy a really sophisticated library, a sound library, you can do a mock-up that sounds really good. But the thing is, you can also create an orchestra piece that sounds fantastic and is impossible to play. And that can be very deceiving. We get some of these pieces in applications and have to look carefully at the score because, yes, it sounds fantastic, but some of the instruments are written out of their range. Some of the lines are clarinet playing forever without taking a breath, that kind of thing. But you don't hear that in your playback. You just hear a brilliant orchestra piece. So there are pitfalls with that. It's a really good, the software, the playback capabilities can be a really, really great tool for composing. Um, no, I'm not talking about orchestrating so much now, but in terms of figuring out the pacing of a piece is much harder to do when you're thinking, when you're trying to imagine it. So playback helps with that a bit, although there's no air in it. There's no humanity in it. So players are going to bring something quite different to your piece. Whereas every time you play playback, it's going to be the same thing, frozen, sort of petrified. So, and of course, once you hear it, it's a bell you can't unring. So I would say to all of you, don't rely on playback too much because it gets in there like an earworm and you can't hear your piece any other way. Um, so yes, use those capabilities. They're great tools, but don't rely on it 100%. Let your imagination really guide you.
This may be for my own self, but I'm curious if you could maybe just explain a little bit the difference in this conversation or maybe in this context between composing and orchestrating
You know,
or
that's
composition
that's a really
orchestration.
that's a really good question. I personally don't view them as being different. I can't separate them. So because when I sit down to compose and I want to write a melody for I hear it as an oboe melody, I will write it as an oboe melody. So I'm hearing the instruments as I'm composing. So some composers will write in short score. They're still hearing the instruments and keeping track of that, but I don't think quite in the same way because visually they're not seeing who's not playing, which is something that I like to do. So if I'm writing for orchestra, the paper is very tall, and if just a few people are playing, I want to see that empty space. That helps me keep track of what the piece is doing. But I'm sure that there are many composers out there that who write sort of an absolute music, perhaps on the keyboard, and then later orchestrate it. And that is entirely uh, doable and can work. So there's no judgment there. It's a part of your process, which approach you take, and sometimes that process can change.
We're getting down to the final wire here, but I wanted to ask, do you know off of the top of your head any great books or resources that you would recommend for orchestration or notation study?
Well, sort of the basic book that has been around quite a while and is still used is an orchestration textbook by Samuel Adler. Um, I've always used, and this is a really old book. I'm sure it has newer editions, but I still use orchestration instrumentation by Alfred Blatter. That's Blatter. Um, so those are two really, really good books. And then for notation, let's see if I can remember the name. I have it on my computer, actually. It's uh, Behind the Bars or Behind the Bar, which does address almost any notation question you might have. And that is sort of a
Yeah.
Bible for the software notation era.
Mhm. Awesome. Well, if there are no more questions, Mindy, I want to thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us today. This has been very eye-opening for me as someone who does not spend a lot of time orchestrating, but definitely a lot of time looking at scores. So just being able to recognize the different textures and effects that composers are using when they're writing for orchestras, I think this is really, really cool. And I hope that everyone here has taken something away from this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today and for checking out this professional development webinar. Again, if you'd like to revisit any of the dialogues that we've hosted, feel free to check out the Learning Lab on our website, where you can find recordings of this one and all of the other sessions that we've had. And again, we also welcome your feedback on today's session. Please use the link in the chat to complete a short survey. Mindy, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you. It was fun. And
Mhm.
all of you.
Yes. Another huge thanks to our earshot partners, American Composers Forum, the New Music USA, and the League of American Orchestras, in addition to the many other individuals and organizations who have made earshot possible through their support. That includes the Altman Foundation, the Elizabeth and Justus Schlichting Mellon Foundation, the Sphinx Venture Fund, the TD Charitable Foundation, Fromm Foundation, Ford Good Neighbor Committee, Aaron Copland Fund for Music, Alice M. Ditson Fund of Columbia University, the League of American Orchestras with support of the Virginia B. Toolman Foundation, and public funds are provided by the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council, the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of Governor Kathy Hochul, and the New York State Legislature and the National Endowment for the Arts. Thank you again for attending today and enjoy the rest of your Thursday.